Good morning, Memorial Drive. How I wish I could look each of you in the eye and ask you, how are you? But I have such great confidence, first in God and then in you and the way you respond to God, that your faith is still growing, and it just encourages me so much. I want you to know the leaders are placing higher than ever a premium on prayer. And one of those things is that they are always accessible. All of us are accessible through our phones or emails, but specifically 8 p.m. And 8 a.m. 3 times a week. So check that in your bulletin, those links. We will be providing a Zoom call, and you can tune into those where we do a Zoom prayer together. And I encourage you to take advantage of that. And also ask that you set an alarm on your phone for 7:47 a.m. and 7:47 p.m. And what we're asking is at that time, just for a minute, take a minute just to offer a prayer for our church family and for all of the leaders that are offering such tremendous care during this time. Thank you for that, and thank you for being part of our family. We've been studying about the incomparable Jesus. And we set these passages months and months ago, and so it's just last week with Tim was just perfect timing, and this week is the same. We're looking at John 14 through 17, and if you've done your reading of today in the email, you've taken small sections of those chapters already. And so in order to take that tremendous passage, because those concepts in this passage, so much of how we think about living together and working with Christ and anticipating our future, our unity, so much of that comes from this text. I mean, there are millions of lessons that could be preached from these 4 chapters. And so knowing I just have a few minutes, I wanted to do something I never do. I'm going to give you 3 points to think about. And what I want to say is, how can you be amazing like Jesus? Because Jesus, and especially in this context, as we'll see in a bit, is amazing. And I would say there's 3 aspects to being amazing, 3 jobs, if you will, because I know we're asking, with all of the things that have been taken away, and that may be very personal for you because you may have lost your job or lost access to family, certainly lost access to friends in your church. What do you do now? And so I think Jesus has tremendous words for us. The first thing I want us to notice is that throughout chapter 14 and 15, Jesus cites multiple times the idea of if you love God, you'll keep his commands. And what I think is fascinating, I mean, here's an example, John 14, 15, you love me, keep my commands. John 14, 22, 23, anyone who loves me will obey my teaching. John 15, 10, if you keep my commands, you'll remain in my love. This is obviously a big deal. And I think it's important to contextualize this because I was raised that his commands applied to, well, you better be at church on Sunday and you better take communion in this way and a long list of things. None of them bad. The question is that what Jesus is talking about here? And especially in our situation where we cannot obey those commands right now. And so are we in trouble? Are we in some way disappointing Christ? And I want us to put it in context. Right before chapter 14, as Jesus has finished up washing the feet, as Jesus has watched Judas depart for his eventual betrayal, Jesus says, a new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you. Then in 14 and 15, he makes these multiple statements about the idea of you better obey this command. And at chapter 15, verse 17, he says, this is my command, love each other. He's not leaving this up to wonder of which commands. He's saying this is it. Now I want to be clear. When I love Jesus, I want to be with the people Jesus loves. When I love Jesus, I want to be honest and I want to be pure and I want to be selfless. But we can't get the cart before the horse here. And what you can do right now is what Jesus asks you to do. You want to be amazing, obey his command. Love. Love God and love others in whatever way. And don't think God lacks an imagination. If you are willing, God will take you where you need to be. The second thing that jumps out at me in this passage is the idea that the word belief shows up. Let me see here. It is 14 times it shows up in chapters 14, 16, and 17. 14 times is a lot of times. That means that this is a focus that Jesus keeps coming back to. Now in chapter 15, the word belief doesn't show up. But what does show up is 11 times Jesus says, I want you to abide or remain in me. And what that means is you stay there. Maybe the most applicable meaning to our context is you wait. I want you to wait. What does that mean to us? Isn't waiting passive? And I want you to notice that in every major experience in the Bible, the people didn't have this huge plan. I would offer to you Acts. These apostles, they didn't have some plan. They were waiting in an upper room, not strategizing, waiting, not knowing what God would do, and then the Spirit came. In Acts chapter 3, Peter and John are not going to have their big second sermon. They're going to the temple to pray, to wait on God. They don't think even healing this man, this paralytic, is going to change things. They're just going to pray. That's how they wait on God. And God causes things to happen. That's how it was then, and it's how it is now. And I want us to be very attentive to our desire to rush ahead. And this is always true, but especially true now. I want us to be attentive to not rush ahead, but to use this time of waiting not as passive, but as incredibly active time to wait in Him. And that it carries this idea of belief, of trust. For those memorial people that are regular, you know the two chairs. I'm saying, notice the chair you're sitting in right now. Notice where you're putting your weight. One chair being God, the other chair is anything else, no matter how good it is. But if you're telling yourself, once the government gets this right, then I can be at peace. Once I know I'll never get this disease, then I'll feel joy. And I want to tell you that's never going to get there for you fully. The answer isn't to just keep finding a better chair other than God. It's to return to the God chair, moment by moment, making the choice to say, God has this. God's got this. He's not scared of this at all. The reality hasn't changed at all to Him. He is still steadfast and stable and trustworthy. And that's what He's asking us. He said, can you, in the midst of all that faces you, can you choose to rest in that chair, trusting me? And I encourage you, take a moment each day, or many moments if you have the opportunity, just to check in and say, am I sitting in the right chair? Am I trusting God right now? Because that's what Jesus did, and it made Him amazing. The third thing that jumps out at me, and I read it several times before it really clicked, but it's the overall context. Now, as we were reading the verses that were in your reading for this morning, those single verses like 14, 1 through 3, do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. This idea of I'm preparing a place for you. John 15, 5, I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. John 16, 33, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In the world you'll have trouble, right? But take heart, I have overcome the world. When He said those things, notice what all was going on around Him. If you cross over to chapter 18, you'll find that immediately the way John lays it out, he doesn't go through Gethsemane like the other Gospels do. But in chapter 18, he says, he writes that they cross over the Kidron Valley, they move into the Garden of Gethsemane, and Judas is there. And what unfolds is the worst, most brutal 24 hours I can even begin to imagine that Jesus is about to experience. Physical and emotional, psychological, social, relational, spiritual pain that I can't even begin to imagine. And why this is so significant to John 14 through 17 is that doesn't happen in a vacuum. The anxiety that He shows when He is there, the anxiety that He expresses in the garden, that is weighing on Him throughout the time He's talking to the people. And I want you to notice that both is true. He is experiencing the suffering, and He's not denying it. He tells God, I know we've been walking through this for a long time, and I know I've been talking about it for a long time, but now it's here, and I don't want it. I don't want this pain. And I want that to sink in, that His humanity was still present. And as a human, He couldn't just turn those emotions on and off. Yes, for a moment He could have focused. But I think every time he took a breath in John 14 through 17, as he's speaking those words, it is resonating, echoing, resounding in his mind. This is my near future. There's about to be a time that there's no more talk. And this is going to hurt more than anything that anyone can imagine. And yet, in the middle of it all, Jesus speaks life. He speaks beauty. He speaks truth. He speaks eternity. And it blesses us to this very day. That's you. That's you. You are the Christ in whatever space you're in. If you are a believer in him, if you are washed in his blood, we have to continue to internalize his identity's reality, not the one we think about ourselves. And he's reaching to you right now and he's saying, do you believe? Do you believe what I say about you? That you are an overcomer, that you are powerful, that you are created to me as a masterpiece, that you have work that I designed in advance for you to do, including right this second. That's you. John 14 talks about, it's this weird thing Jesus says. He says, do you understand you will do greater things than I do? Let that settle in. You will do greater things than Jesus does? I don't know the full import of that, but I can honestly say that it's easy enough to understand at least this piece of it. Jesus on earth had the Spirit of God in him as one man, but now the Spirit of God is within all those who are in Christ. That means that whereas Jesus was limited to where he was, we are spread out everywhere. And I think that's applicable even to us on a Sunday, on any given time, as a body of believers. Man, that's important. But we can't all go to all the situations you find yourself in, to all the Zoom calls, all the prayer times, all the porch visits that you do. But because God is in all of us, you're accomplishing more than the body altogether can. And I think that's just a beautiful truth. In a time where everything is so unstable, we have to keep reminding ourselves that God's not afraid of this. And so I want to be very clear. Jesus said when he's there in Gethsemane, he said, I don't want this, but not my will, but yours be done. Both are important. And I encourage you, really be honest about your anxiety, about your fear, about your sadness, about your tender. Do you know how sad I am when I hear on the news that this wife is saying that she couldn't be there even to tell her husband she loved him as he died? She couldn't be in the hospital. That is heartbreaking. And to call it anything less is just living in denial. And so we own the fact these are the things that are hurtful. These are the things that are weighing me down. And we say, God, I don't want this, but I still want your will to be done. And we enter every situation with three fundamental choices. We can be a critic, find everything wrong with something, a cynic, and be like, I don't believe their motivation, or a believer. I know if I was a good preacher, I'd have found another C word, but that's all I had. But a believer, a person that will look into it and say, I believe you're working through this. On Thursday night, something amazing happened. Where the state of Oklahoma, in a sense, came together, and it was on, television on Channel 6, and these different pastors and the governor and the governor's wives were sharing prayers and thoughts, and I recognized those three dynamics. I could be a critic and pick, I don't like what they said that, or I could be a cynic and say, well, where's this coming from? Or I could just believe, not in them, they're humans just like me, but believe that God would work through it. And man, taking that posture, it changed the way I was interpreting everything. Man, I cried through it. It was just beautiful. And I encourage you, all of life is like that. Can I encourage you, the devil wants you to be the critic and the devil wants you to be the cynic, but you choose to be the believer. And that makes you amazing. We have opportunities around us all the time, even now. We're starting porch visits, and if you'd be willing to be part of that, we'd love to have you come on board. If you need a porch visit, let us know. We're trying to keep people connected in whatever way is possible. If you need a delivery, we want to do everything we can to do that because we are still the body and we work powerfully. So as you transition to your communion time, I want to encourage you to just think through those two questions. What is the anxiety you feel? But what is in Jesus that you see that's so incredible? Just know that you are loved, you are not forgotten, and you are just as powerful as you ever were. I love you.